Hello, innovators. I'm Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today we're talking with Elizabeth Wilson, aka ArisenRoses online, a software engineer, security advocate, and hacker, photographer, and overall well-rounded creative polymath, as well as AI and space tech enthusiast. So that's cool too. Thank you for joining me on the Polymath Polycast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here today.
It's a lot of fun. This is a show by PolyInnovator, so I'd like to address the audience as innovators. So please say hello.
Hello, innovators.
Hello and welcome to the Polymath Polycast. It's a nice way of just kind of getting people to try to group together and do big things. And one way I like to break the ice on the show is to have you share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
See, that would be difficult for me to do because I'm a very open book and pretty much told my partner anything and everything in my life. But I thought about this a little bit and, I had black tea for breakfast this morning and I have not yet told anybody that.
Hmm.
So that is something that I could actually tell you. It's the only thing I could think of that I have not told anybody before.
I think that's the most cop out answer I've heard on the show, but I love it.
It's the most
So it's fine.
honest answer. I can tell you things
Yeah,
that I haven't told many people.
yeah, that works too. I'm not very picky about it. It's one of those things where if you can answer a question like that, that's pretty difficult at first. All the other questions afterwards become super easy.
Well, but see, it was difficult for me to come up with this because I wanted to answer it truthfully, and it's something that I've
Right.
never told anybody. So in a way, it was actually very difficult.
Yeah, that's true. Well, then, let's move on to the questions. What was your mindset 5 years ago, and how have you changed since then?
5 years ago would have been 2016, right? Yeah, so I would have just graduated in college from 2015 for my undergrad. I spent like 6 months doing work as a network cable puller, putting in like data cabling on like construction
Oh,
sites and in offices and things. And then I ended up switching for that to going to like software dev work and moved up to Kansas City at that time because I fell in love with this kid who lived up here. And then I more or less, I don't know, like how have I changed? I've become more educated. I'm still mostly the same person. So it's not really that different from 5 years. I've just gained a degree and spoken at a conference now and had a few
now
internships
you're
and
on a
other interesting
podcast, I
things.
guess.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's mostly just the things that have happened along the way. I'm still pretty much the same person. I mean, I've done Circus now. That's new. That was a thing in 2018. Very new to me. I was out of shape before I started doing that. So that was very interesting to kind of like jump into head first.
Yeah. Well, and I would say that you probably are a different person. You've learned a lot more. You've experimented with circus and meeting people, and I think a degree would change you a decent amount. Maybe not like personality wise, but in the way you think, the logic you have, that kind of thing.
Yes and no. I don't know. I feel like I've always been a very like I've changed some since like maybe when I was a child. Like of course, like that's an automatic thing, but I've always been very like set in kind of my personality. Like I embrace like kindness and intelligence and like I've always had very set core values, I think. So I don't change much
Hmm.
over time. At least that's kind of like the way my friends seem to present to me as well. So I just get smarter, it seems like, and do cooler things.
Yeah. Well, let's start off with your degrees then. You already have two, and you're starting your third one this month at the time of this recording. What are they about?
So my original degree was an international business degree. This was concentrated in Russian culture and language. I actually originally started out a nursing major and then decided that I didn't like people enough to be a nurse, which is very honest. I could not handle like I went on rotations with somebody and saw someone like spit on a nurse that was taking care of them, and like I saw some really rude things, and I just could not. I was like I could not handle this if it was me, so I backed out of that and became an
Hmm.
international business major. And that one I did. It's essentially a dual degree of business and Russian language. For like the amount of hours you take, it's essentially like a double degree. And then I did more on top of that to get a certification for localization and translation in Russian. So I took like extra translation classes and things that weren't required. There was a semester I was essentially doing 18 hours over the board and another three that were just me auditing a class. So like 7 classes in a
Hmm.
semester. It was an intense undergraduate degree just to get it all done. And then I turned around and didn't really use it for what I went into because I refound kind of my passion for tech that I had when I was younger. I just was never encouraged to follow it, I guess. And my current partner actually really encouraged me to like chase that dream some. And so when I ended up like getting into a software development role and working that for a couple of years at 2 different places, I then ended up applying to a few of these new master's degrees. My most recent one, they're actually called Erasmus Mundus master's degrees. And I'm going to guess you've probably never heard of them, right?
No, I don't think I'm familiar.
They're very, very well known in Europe because it's a EU commission funded set of degrees, but they're not very well known in the US. So when I ran across them, I thought it was a really cool opportunity because it's fully funded opportunities for degrees in some cases. So I actually applied to one of them the first year that I found them, and I got in, but I didn't get a scholarship, so I just turned it down, and I kept working. And then I applied for 3 more of those programs the next year, and they were very different programs. One of them was in linguistics, essentially. It was software development and linguistics, natural language processing stuff, and that was my number 1 choice. And then the one that I got was security, intelligence, and strategic studies, concentrating in security and technology. And that one I actually got the scholarship for. And the third one I applied to, I didn't get in, so I just discounted it.
Nice.
So I pretty much just looked at it and I was like, well, I could pay $40,000 to go to my number 1 choice, or I could be paid to get my master's degree for my number 2. So it's kind of been a trend in my life, I feel like, where I like to keep my options open for things. I don't try to pin myself down to one thing.
So what got you into security?
Actually, my partner did, really. I was very into tech before that, and I had learned some software development in Java back in high school, and picked up some more while I was on the job after I got hired as a software developer. Lots of different languages and things, but he is actually a security person and does application security work. So he kind of, since he was always talking about it and going to conferences and things, and he started bringing me with him to some of these conferences, and I got interested in it. And it became a thing where now, because we both are really interested in it, we both go to conferences. Nice. And we get to bond over these things. And he's really happy he found a partner who can actually understand it all, because not everybody in the industry has that. A lot of people actually, it's pretty uncommon to have a partner who can understand your whole field. That's pretty
in general, not just in security, but just in general, having a partner to understand your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So he was kind of inspiration, but then the community itself is just really fascinating, and the subject is fascinating as well. So after that, I just sort of dived headfirst into it.
That's awesome. And so it's interesting too, because there is a lot of emerging technologies in the security field, but just in general too. And one of the things I was curious about, because you were talking about emergent technologies, and I think in the Calendly sign up there, what sort of emergent technologies are you most excited about?
Machine learning and artificial intelligence are probably my number 1. That's actually what I concentrated my dissertation on for my degree. I focused on the benefits and threats of artificial intelligence, and how assorted governments across the world are actually paying attention to these benefits and threats within their public documents. So at the time, I actually read every single policy document related to machine learning and AI from every government around the world. That was public knowledge, awesome. Including some that were in Chinese and Korean, which I translated with my translation skills and just read through, which was very interesting actually. Yeah. The Chinese, fascinating. And I sort of mapped out where the good and bad coverage on pros and cons are within these documents and things. That's kind of one of my probably favorite for the emerging technologies, but I also really like nanotechnology as well, and quantum computing.
I had a quantum researcher on the show, Anastasia Marchenkova. She was really interesting when it comes to just understanding quantum computing in general. And yeah, just learning more about those technologies is just so fascinating, because the way that we approach our daily lives could be dramatically impacted by those. And I wish I had read your dissertation before interviewing you. I should have done that. So maybe the next time I have you on, I will read it by then. And then
it's a heavy work, so it's a good 80-90 pages.
I've read other people's PhDs dissertation, PhD or master levels dissertation before having them come on. So I think I'll try to, even if I fail at understanding all of it, I'll just make more questions to ask you. Yes. But it is interesting to think about with all the different technologies. Is there any particular use case of AI that attracts you most?
There are many, actually, many potentials. AI and machine learning is just such a complex, like, future.
Hmm.
And because it's so complex, it's actually very threatening. There's, have you ever heard of catastrophic existential threat? Like
Yes.
existential risk? AI is one of the few things that could cause us catastrophic existential risk, which is why I kind of got into the study that I did and got interested in working with it, etc.
Hmm.
And so, like, the risk of like an AI becoming super intelligent and going rogue on us someday, like, I want to help prevent that
Yeah.
in the long. It's actually why I applied to the master degree that I'm going to be starting soon, because it's computer science masters that focuses mostly on machine learning.
Hmm. Are you learning, like, what is it, Golang? Or what is the Google machine learning main tool?
Oh, maybe
System.
go. No, I'm
Yes. MongoDB, something like that. I remember hearing about it recently. I'm not much of a programmer. I've tried, but like I understand certain languages when it comes to this, their use cases and a more high level kind of thing. But it is interesting just how divergent certain companies are, but they're often pursuing the same goals. I don't know. It is one of those things, that existential crisis when it comes to super intelligence or just AI in general when it comes to that. It's a whole Terminator tangent right there.
It really is, but it is actually a real threat. It's a
Yeah.
small chance, which is why it's like very small chance, but it is still a chance, and we have to plan for that as a society, literally.
Yeah, well, no, but seriously, we do, and I know that there's a lot of CEOs like Elon Musk that people often like scoff at, but like they literally, I think, signed a document, open letter to everyone saying like we need to be worried about AI. It's like, hey, let's take this very seriously.
I actually referenced that letter in my dissertation.
That's funny.
And I signed that letter myself back in the day. So my name is somewhere in that long list of people that most people don't care as much about. But I'm no Elon Musk.
Yet, not Elon Musk yet. Where do you see smart cities coming into play when it comes to emergent tech?
Smart cities, I have mixed feelings on, being with like a security background. Like
Hmm.
smart houses, smart cities, like there's a reason why our industrial things are still not smart. They actually keep them mostly like more analog overall. Like anytime you make something smart, you're connecting it to the internet typically, and then you get the Internet of Things. And a lot of times people don't make these things with security in mind. So you have like botnets that are taking over refrigerators and things like that, and taking over light bulbs, and like you make all these things to connect them all, but then you don't think about like, well, what happens when somebody's smart enough to be able to do something malicious to that?
Hmm. I mean, that's the whole premise behind the video game Watch Dogs. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and
It literally is.
and your talk was really interesting too about satellites and how people can easily hack into them for the most part, because security was not something people accounted for when they sent them up into the orbit.
I wouldn't say that it's easy still.
But
It's a very like esoteric thing. And like DEF CON this year actually did like a satellite hacking competition, and it was like very intense, lots of money, like very difficult.
Okay, so not easy, but
typically easy. But it is easy to listen in, not hack, but listen in on some satellite communications because they're not protected. Like the things like I spoke of like Iridium and that project and stuff. That's more listening in, which isn't directly hacking. It's more spying than hacking, kind of. I don't know, like because it's not really you're having to like break into anything.
Right.
You're just kind of having to like figure out the right frequency to listen on more than anything.
Well, I think a good example, maybe not for satellites, but just in general, Parler recently is that app that went down. It's a whole big deal. But what was interesting about that is that it got hacked, because when AWS started to shut it down, you could still make an account, but not necessarily have to put in your phone number or email address or anything like that. And so some of the hackers got in and made an admin account and got all the information from it, which I thought was interesting.
They made lots of admin accounts, actually.
Oh, okay.
I think they made like 1 million admin accounts or something like that.
That's crazy.
At least if that's the truth that I heard. I read that, of course, through the grapevine on Twitter of InfoSec community. But
right.
Either way, like it's one of those things of like, yeah, that stuff is kind of scary when you start getting into it.
Even just like my old website was hosted on WordPress, and it was one of those things that every single plugin that I had, and it required many just to operate like the basic functionalities. Just every plugin was a point of entry, and it's not like these are plugins that are made by huge companies. Sometimes they're just small teams that can't really focus on doing security patches every week to make sure there's not a bot that'll crawl in.
Yep, and when you get very smart people who want to like try and exploit these things, I mean, unfortunately, like it's a problem. That's why I really like being in the positive side of security. I am absolutely probably 100% a white hat.
But still,
like,
it's still positive though. We need people like you who are not only skilled but also happy to do it and encouraged to do it and like actually want to do it. You know.
And the security mindset is definitely a thing. Not everybody thinks the way to actually like be like secure. I saw it a lot in my class with my classmates who didn't really have as much technical training during my last degree, where like essentially they are political science background, and while I have my tech background, we were doing tech-based political science classes. So things like, you know, my space security course that I took that my class turned into, a talk for, which is the talk you saw. That was my actual final paper in my space security course. So like things like that. I got the technical a little bit easier and things. So my classmates would sometimes like, it was definitely made, like the classes were made for somebody who didn't have a technical background, I would say. So I was a little disappointed in that, which is why I'm also very happy to be doing another more technical degree now as well. The degree was fascinating, and it was a really, really, like I learned so much, but it was definitely very political science, way more political science than I had expected walking into it, even though it was a political science degree, because they touted it being security and technology oriented.
Yeah, and it's just, you sometimes still kind of thinking about is the whole idea of like IoT and smart networks and smart tech when it comes to just points of entry that way. And I was talking to my uncle who's a cybersecurity expert literally just the other day, and we both really want to have automation in our households, like having the Google Home and having the Nest thermostat and all these different tools to make our lives easier. But like you said, they all have to connect to the internet. And he made a very astute point. It's like, why? There's still technologies out there that can be smart, but can be on a home server, that can be disconnected from the internet, and just have it just in that one particular network, have this hard wiring to all of the devices if you need to, that we don't have any wireless at all activated. Like, there is ways to do it, but we're still forcing this whole idea of the cloud.
Yep. And not just that, it's also those ways to do that are hard. Whereas all these other things are simple and easy, plug and play. Like people don't have to know how to do their own home networking to make it, you know, go. So unfortunately, like I really wish people made these things with security in the forefront of their mind and not as an afterthought.
Yeah. Well, I got a smart speaker for my grandmother for Christmas, actually, and I helped her set it up, but honestly, she could have done it on her own. It was that simple. Just literally download the app, plug in the Wi-Fi essentially, and boom, you're ready to go. And she's using it a lot. And like, it's one of those things where it was a good purchase, but it's just one of those things too that could be dangerous if she ended up having too much smart tech and someone could like hack into, hey, Google, and say, oh, probably shouldn't set it off. But basically having those issues there.
Yeah, I mean, that's very real. And like the more you plug into your house, the more points of entry you're potentially putting into it as well. And it's the same thing for websites and other things. It's actually like how you mentioned your website, you have all these different plugins and pieces. And I've been trying to plan my website, but I get kind of like, I start to not want to do it at times because then I'm like, well, but then I'm in the hacker community and people are going to probably test my website at some point, and I don't want to deal with that.
Well, it is one thing why I left WordPress is that there was a lot of meta work. And so talking about just like getting something done, like writing a blog post kind of thing, I always ended up having to update plugins or mess around with my design of my site or just do stuff that cut me from doing what I needed to do. And so that's when I moved to Ghost. And Ghost is supposedly a lot faster, a little bit more secure. It's built on JavaScript, so much newer technology than PHP. So I hope maybe just something like that might help too, just by going with a newer piece of tech.
Oh yeah, of course. But like being a software dev and like somebody who does all the kind of the stuff, I kind of want to build it from scratch myself. Like,
yeah.
So there's also that aspect of like, I really want it, well, I mean, from scratch using libraries, of course, you're always standing on the shoulders of other giants in tech. That's the beautiful part of it. Like, I don't have to go back and actually write this in, you know, assembly.
Yeah. I thought about writing a website in Rust. I thought that'd be kind of cool.
It's a very interesting language. It's not one I have a bunch of experience with yet. I'm mostly older school languages, though I also am a big fan of R and Python. I've dabbled in a lot of things.
Yeah, I dabbled in a little bit of Python. I knew about R, but I never really studied it enough to actually do it. But I was trying to learn data science because I thought that'd be very important for smart cities, obviously. And so that's one reason why I was trying to dig into it. It's just one of those things where functional programming, like those two, especially Python, is different than what I was experienced with like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, where it's more just high level stuff.
Oh yeah, it's a whole nother world, absolutely. Like I love the different styles of languages though, because just like human language, you just get different flavors of things you can do in different programming languages. Like some of them have been made for very specific things. Like R is very good at data science.
Yeah.
So is Python. Python's good at like everything almost because Python's very flexible. It's in the name. Like it's very interesting when you kind of break it down and compare these things.
Well, and like even just different flavors of languages, I thought was a good point you made there. My stepdad's Mexican, and so I grew up with Mexican-based Spanish and also Duolingo, of course, which we'll go into in a little bit. But it's interesting how my client's family is Peruvian that I teach, and so like their Spanish is different, and just the interactions we have, and just understanding the nuances and the different slang. And I've met people from Puerto Rico or Cuba, and it's just the way that Spanish is activated that way. It's just so much different. It's funny.
Oh, I love dialects. Dialects fascinate me because, like, so for example, also with Spanish, I grew up in Texas. So the most accessible and most useful language for me to take in high school is Spanish. I've probably taken like 4 to 5 years of Spanish academically throughout middle and high school. And I was also at a school that was Hispanic, about 98% Hispanic.
Nice.
So I was constantly surrounded by like Hispanic culture and music and language. And at a certain point, after about 7 years or so of your formative life being surrounded by all of that, you kind of take on parts of the culture. I have friends and classmates back in the day who would say that I might as well just be Mexican at that point because I'd been around the culture and been coming to all the quinceañeras and speak Spanish to some degree. And like, but the funny thing was watching all of these Mexican Hispanic kids take a Spanish class taught by a Spanish man.
Oh no.
They all thought
gross.
They would breeze right through it, and then there was all these little differences in the language that would catch them, and it was so funny to watch like this whole class full of kids who took it just because they thought it'd be an easy class struggle just a little bit.
Yeah, well, it was funny because that's why I said oh no, because I was like I remember all the differences like vosotros versus nosotros and just things like that you're just not used to, or even just the way of pronunciation. Like in fact, that Peruvian client was kind of trashing on Spanish, even though that's the original Spanish, which is kind of funny. And it's interesting too, Duolingo was one of the best tools I've used growing up with Spanish. And I grew up with it, like you said, like you did too. But it was interesting how I have Hispanic blood in me, but we obviously don't look it too much. There is plenty of Mexicans who are white as white, basically too. But it is interesting how like I was always kind of called the wannabe Mexican kind of thing, which I thought was like, no, I grew up in this environment. I should,
Actually, I am.
Yeah, actually, I am. In fact, I have native Mexican, like Yucatan Peninsula and everything too, and like Aztec and Mayan kind of thing. I did the DNA test. Yeah, I thought that was really cool. And so, what got you into Duolingo, by the way? Speaking of that.
Just my love for languages in general, actually, because so I did Spanish in high school, and then I picked up Russian in my college degree. And during the language courses that I mentioned before, doing translation work, I was doing like globalization, internationalization, localization, and translation was the title of the course. And interestingly enough, I once had to translate a French poem for that course. I don't speak French.
That's crazy. It's one of those things too where, especially with Latin languages, there's so many cognates that you can literally. I know enough of French, a tiny bit of Italian, that like when I read Portuguese, and of course Spanish obviously in the background, I can read a little bit of Portuguese just because of the cognates I know in the other 3 languages.
But the interesting thing is when you get into poetry and things like that, how do you like the challenge of translating a poem and keeping like, especially one that's like done on a set rhyme speed and like with like couplets and things, keeping that feel and the meaning and like everything together. It was an interesting challenge, and it really sparked my love of just like language in general, just using it as like a puzzle, kind of.
I really see the polymathy when you're saying that too. Like you really have to take a polymathic approach when it comes to languages and understanding them. And then one thing I think there's an episode that I want you to watch after this. It's from Thomas Parixma. He was one of the people I had on the show, and he is like a dancer, singer, comedian in a way, but performer in general. And he was telling me about how he was translating a Tamil book of work, I think it's a poetry book, and he was learning something all at the same time, but understanding just like the language and how do you take the essence of that particular poem or speech or rhyme and translate it to another language? Because he read an English translation of it and he's like, this is garbage. It's nowhere close to the original source.
Exactly. Those moments are really rewarding too when you're like, you finally successfully do it, at least like to where you're happy enough with it. Like it's never going to be perfect. So, like some of these things will never be perfect.
And you may always go back to it too.
We just don't have the words in English for some things. Like you'd have to make up a word or just borrow the word.
Yeah, I mean, English completely borrows everything. It's kind of funny that Arabic does that too. Arabic borrows English words most of the time when there's like for like cell phone and stuff like that.
I learned that and I thought it was really interesting. I've learned some really basic Arabic. I use Duolingo to kind of learn the lettering at least, but I haven't gone much deeper than that. I just kind of wanted to explore how to read it in general after having a couple classmates who like write in Arabic and things and are from like the Middle East area. So it just kind of inspired me to want to be able to like at least sound out the letters, I guess. I've probably, let me see, I'll flip my Duolingo real quick. Let me see how many languages I've actually learned pieces of.
Well, I was going to ask you, what about Esperanto?
I think it's a fascinating language. I ran across it probably like a decade ago originally. I haven't tried to learn it. There's Esperanto and then there's another one that's a competing.
Tokipana.
Yeah, that's another one that I've looked at a little bit. I've never really learned them, but I've glanced over and like viewed some of the vocabulary out of curiosity. They just aren't very practical. So
yeah, I agree. I wish Esperanto was more practical and more prevalent because it really is like one of the best languages I've ever learned. And I'm looking at my Duolingo here too, and like the only three I have there are French, Italian, Spanish, and Esperanto. And Esperanto was just so interesting how it rolled off the tongue. It combined Latin and Germanic influences in a just unique way to this La Canabo Estabona. Like it's just, you can almost hear the German in it, but you also hear the Spanish flowing through.
It's a very unique linguistic like project that I really, really enjoyed actually, and still enjoy it. I'm glad it's still going actually and still getting bigger. I haven't touched on it in literally about a decade, I'd say. I was probably in high school the last time I had looked at it.
Right.
But yeah, I've got mine up, and so I've done Spanish, Russian, Arabic, Latin, Czech, German, Portuguese, Chinese, Irish, Italian, Japanese, and Greek.
Guten Tag. That's all I can really say to that. That's a lot of languages there.
I did one semester of German while I was in Glasgow, actually. So I actually have one semester of academic German as well.
Nice.
Most of these are just bits and pieces. Like I did Czech while I was living in Prague so I could understand things and speak basic things with people. Like I tend to practice the language that's most useful wherever I'm living at the time.
Yeah.
So like right now I'm practicing my Spanish again, getting back up on that because it's most useful in the US.
Yeah. Well, and something you mentioned to me is that you love Prague. So you want to help explain that a bit?
Oh, the city is just so amazing. Out of the entire like 3 semesters, technically 2 years, 4 semesters or so I spent overseas, Prague was probably my favorite place to live just because something about like the people, even when we couldn't communicate perfectly, people were very friendly and like the city itself is beautiful and has so much history. My university there that I graduated from was opened in the 1400s.
Wow.
Like,
that's crazy.
You just can't get that in the US, literally. Like, it's older than America.
Yeah.
That would be Charles University in Prague. Their unique culture. And I made so many friends there and just interesting humans that weren't even Czech in all cases. Like I met some really interesting Italian physicists that I became friends with that were living in Prague. And Prague just pulls a bunch of really interesting European people from all over. It has a very heavy tech sector as well. I ended up going to a crypto rave once, which was pretty cool on Halloween.
Cool. Yeah.
They were doing a conference on like Ethereum in town, and I saw a random crypto rave, and I was like, I'm going to try and go to this.
I like that. It's a very opportunistic mentality.
Oh, that is definitely how I have lived my life, but like not in a negative way. It's like how I said earlier when we were on the other recording that like I applied to 3 very different master's programs for going overseas, and I went with the one that gave me a scholarship.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's just it. You have more doors in life if you just don't close them.
Well, when you were speaking there too, it made me think maybe I should go to Germany because don't they offer free college even for foreigners if you live there?
Don't actually know that. I've heard some things like that before in some European countries, but I've never confirmed it. So
No, that's kind of cool.
It would be, absolutely. And like, if there's stuff that you're interested in, I mean, I would advise, even for other people who might be listening, checking out the Erasmus Mundus master's degrees. They literally come in all kinds of flavors. Like, they had ones for like water treatment, and from all the way from that to like the security and intelligence one that I did. So it's very interesting, a really cool scheme that the EU is doing to try and like push really interesting subjects.
Yeah. Well, and it seems too you traveled a lot from like Spain, Switzerland, and what have you learned from and experienced through all that journey that you have done?
Oh man, so many things. So many things. So for your reference, I had never even been on a plane before until I was 20.
Wow.
And then I literally flew to Russia alone on a 12-hour flight from Houston to Moscow. And I learned a lot of Russian on that trip.
Yeah.
I learned how it feels to be on the other side of the world from everybody you know and love. I was for a full 4 or 5 days completely alone over there, traveling St. Petersburg and Moscow. Stayed with strangers from couchsurfing.org, one of which I'm still friends with now. She was a part of a lesbian couple and told me some really intense stories from protests in St. Petersburg. Man, that travel was so fascinating, because the whole reason I went over there in the first place was doing volunteer work with orphanages and halfway homes down in like the southwestern edge of Russia in the Talavea region. So I was actually meeting back up with a whole group at the end of that, and like I could just talk about Russia all day, because I was 2 weeks there, and like that could literally be its whole own podcast. My experience of living in Russia for 2 weeks and working with these children. There was some fantastic moments, of course, of just like learning interesting things. But one that sticks out to me was almost getting arrested by the Russian police for somebody else's jaywalking.
How do you get arrested for it, though?
Yeah, right. So I was near the what's it called? The Hermitage in St. Petersburg, and I was trying to go to the museum since it's like this beautiful, massive museum that they've turned it into. And so was this other little like pair of Asian women. And they came up to me trying to figure out how to cross the street, and I had no idea how to cross the street. But they could tell I was just as lost and didn't fit in as they did. And they decided just to cross it. And I was like, not doing that. And some cop grabbed them, literally as they were crossing the street, brought them back to me, and started speaking Russian at us and saying, like, I couldn't make out all of it, but because I'd only been learning Russian like a year at the time, maybe. And so I could understand bits, and it was essentially him saying he needed to take us down to the like station. And we were to follow him, and like we were supposed to follow him down because of them jaywalking. Like, it was some weird, it sounded very weird, very manipulative. And I was just like, even though I understand him, I'm going to pretend I don't.
Yeah.
Just and I just the entire time just pretended I had no idea what he was saying. I was confused. Like, I literally didn't know these women. Yeah. So I'm like, I could distance myself, but also keep them protected, because it's just 2 pretty little Asian women who are alone in Russia.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of keeping an eye on them too, and eventually he just goes, Americans, and like storms off.
That's good. That's lucky.
I frustrated a Russian police officer so much he stormed off and left us alone.
Maybe he wasn't an actual police officer?
I'm pretty sure he was.
Okay.
He looked the part. So okay. I mean, he might not have been, but it was such a small violation. There's no reason we should have been going down to any like, especially not me. Number one, they literally crossed a street jaywalking. That's a bit harsh. Like. Right. A bit extreme. It seemed like it was an extreme moment there, but I learned then to just pretend to speak another language if you don't want to deal with somebody. I've used that in countries as well.
I have used that too, just to get out of conversations and whatnot.
Especially as a woman, I feel like it works well for me. Like, I did something similar actually when I went to South Africa. I was sitting overnight in the airport in Johannesburg, which is apparently kind of sketchy at night. I'm used to being able to just stay overnight in an airport for like 12 hours and it not be a problem, but literally like everyone like left the airport immediately and like went to hotels. And I was just sitting there like me and like maybe 2 other people in this giant empty cold room, and I'm just kind of like, this is a little sketchy. Yeah. And then this man approached me looking like he's in a military outfit, saying that I needed to follow him somewhere in the airport because it was too cold in the room. And I was just like, I'm not going anywhere in the middle of the night with a random man in the Johannesburg airport. Yeah. No. So I just started yelling at him in Russian. I was like, "Извините, я не понимаю, я не говорю по-английски, извините." I started saying like, "Excuse me, I don't speak English. I'm sorry." Like, if somebody did speak Russian, I wouldn't be saying anything like rude or bad. But I just started yelling this stuff at him, and he was just like,
"Yeah, never mind." Yeah, that's funny. Well, kind of moving on a little bit here too. How have you spent your recent life, considering like COVID and whatnot? Do you have a COVID resolution over the past pandemic, quarantine, whatever the ways to explain it?
Man, I mean, most of the pandemic has just been spent with me hunting for jobs. And also the recent application I did for the master's degree that I'm going to be doing soon. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of interviews recently where it's been like, I'll make it to like the last round and he said, hey, you're our top candidate. And then 2 weeks later, I get told somebody who was fired from another company came in who has senior level experience. And so we're going to take on the senior level experience person. Sorry.
I hate stuff like that.
And it doesn't help that I graduated directly into the pandemic almost. Like I graduated December 2019 and then March pandemic hit. I literally had all these conferences set up that I was volunteering at and going to be like going to and networking. And I still did that. I still went online and did these things, but it's just not the same when it's not directly in front of you. You can't just like bump into the CEO of a company in a unicorn onesie like when you're online at home as easily. Like
okay, I will say kind of. So at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was online, everyone was using Zoom, and I took advantage of that and was able to do interviews with these CEOs. So it was almost like bumping into them, but I was using a tool for it called Matchmaker.fm, which I can send to you later if you like. Because it's interesting because you can almost do that kind of interaction in a way, but online, but you have to kind of be intentional about it. It's not like you said, accidental, where you're like literally accidentally bumping into somebody that's really important.
I miss that because that's how I make my friends usually is I just meet strangers and they end up being cool people. And
like
so
us, we met, like, yeah.
Literally, like that's how I've made my friends all over the world at this point. Like I've got friends in so many different countries. Like you had asked about the travels and things and like what I've learned before. I told you I'd never even been on a plane before when I was 20. Now I've been to like almost 20 countries.
Man, that's crazy. I'm jealous. I need to learn from you.
I would have never thought I would be here either. Like when I was a kid though, I grew up really poor, which is why I'd never like been anywhere or anything. Like I'd been down to Mexico once when I was really little, like driving my grandmother down there kind of a thing with my family. Like that was about it for my travels. And so it's been just embracing the chance of being overseas and jumping on a bunch of different little things that I had the opportunity for. Like I went to a conference while I was over there for security. One of the oldest ones that's in existence right now, CCC, which is the Chaos Community Congress in Germany. So I took advantage of being in Europe and my partner actually came over and we both went to that conference.
That's awesome. Well, and it's interesting too, because just with the opportunity with conferences, like you said, I almost wonder if you maybe need to go on a podcast tour and just like talk to people about security. That'd be kind of cool too.
I've technically briefly been on one other, but it was just about my talk that I had given in August. So it was very narrow, et cetera. Like I've got so many different interests. Like we haven't even touched on my circus stuff that I've done or my music or my art or like.
We're only halfway through the questions too.
I'm a very multifaceted person, as one of my friends told me.
Well, which is perfect for the show. And you mentioned to me actually too that you're a pretty well-rounded person, kind of mean the same thing there with knowledge and skills. Let's dig into that a bit. So what sort of skills do you employ in your life and how do they interconnect?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I feel like I have a lot of different ones at varying levels of expertise, of course. Not all of them am I an expert at. Some of them are just hobbies. Like I'm not the best crocheter in the world, but I'm working on a couple small projects. And I have a friend who's going to try and guide me on making a crochet rose. So that's going to be probably my most like intense project I've ever done on crochet. But I feel like I use so many of my skills just crossing them and when I do projects in general. So it's just like a natural thing for me that they merge kind of, and I use them naturally. So like, I don't know, I play music most days in some form. I use my linguistic skills, both like in English, naturally talking with people all the time, as well as like a few other languages I'll occasionally branch out in, mostly Spanish and Russian. Making friends and connections on the internet that don't speak English, which is always kind of fun.
Yeah.
Just because I love languages because it gives you more people to talk to.
Right. It literally is. And I'll go on Omegle or even just playing an online game and they're like, sorry, I only speak Spanish. And I'm like, está bien, claro que sí. Vamos allá. So let's just go that way. And like, it's funny because like, they're like, oh, cool. Like I didn't expect that. And you're able to do things with that person and you can make connections that way.
And people are oftentimes, even if you mess up some things, like people are very happy that you're trying, I found.
Yeah.
Like in Italy, I didn't know a lot of Italian when I was visiting Italy, but I learned just enough before I went to be able to say like my pleasantries, my hello, thank you, goodbye. My go-to was sei meraviglioso, to thank people, which means you're marvelous.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, it makes them feel even better. You know, it's funny. I was a cashier. It's not funny. It's an interesting story, touching story. I was a cashier for many years, and one of the things I did is I saw this group coming up, and I could hear the Spanish, and I was like, like not listening in, but I could just hear that. Okay, that is Spanish. Let's speak Spanish when they get here. And so I just greeted them in Spanish and did the transaction in Spanish. And that's the thing is, the person was so not used to it. Like he almost was brought to tears because he was just felt so welcomed in a way. And I was like, oh, I'm happy for him. Like I was able to make that feeling for him.
I've had that moment with a couple of people where like I made the effort to say anything in their home language, and because they feel so out of place usually, they're just like, oh my gosh, like thank you.
Yeah.
Like I don't know a ton of Greek, but I learned enough to say hello to a friend who was feeling really out of sorts one day, and she was just kind of like, oh, I can't believe you bothered to even learn a couple of words of my language. Yeah. Like
I'll have to learn more Greek. I'm not much of a Greek speaker, but yeah. Well, and it's it's interesting with French too. I don't speak French as well as I hope I would. And yeah, it's like I can't.
I don't do French.
I like French music, so I've picked up words that way, but I can't speak it very well because I don't understand when people talk to me about it. So I can speak the words usually, but I can't get it back. And it's interesting. At one point, I was doing a cashiering thing, and there was this mom and daughter talking, and I was out of curiosity, I was trying to figure out what language was it, and I couldn't identify it per se. And then they literally, I'm just sitting there scanning, not really paying attention to them per se, besides just trying to hear the language. And I'm scanning, and they just turned to me and started speaking to me in French, like just assuming that I spoke it. And so I just spoke it back enough to where I was able to keep the conversation going at least a little bit. It was just funny how just happenstance that was.
Oh, absolutely. I love little moments like that. I had something like that when I was living in Dublin.
Mm-hmm.
I was on the bus on the way to Dublin City Centre to do my aerials classes. And it's about 2 bus changes and about an hour in total of buses to get there. Wow. So I was sitting on the bus for a while. And this guy sat down next to me, and he was speaking Russian on the phone the entire time. And I don't think he knew that I could, I mean, he obviously didn't know that I could understand him. He assumed nobody on this bus would understand him, and he's sitting right next to me in my ear almost, and he's like saying some scandalous things, and I'm sitting here just like trying not to react, really hard trying not to react. And I finally go to get off the bus, and I had to pass by him, and my umbrella dropped, and I didn't notice. And in Dublin, I need an umbrella, I really do. He got my attention, and he was like, "Miss, your umbrella," and I just went, "Spasibo bolshoye," and and the look on his face, man, he just looked so like
horrified
because he realized that he had been speaking in front of me. And then he said to me in Russian, "Wait, where are you from?" And when I said I was from Texas, he just looked even more shocked. And for a moment, he was going to follow me off the bus, but I was already gone and the doors closed. And like, it was just this moment of him like watching me out the window as the bus left, and me just being like,
"Bye." That's hilarious.
Yeah. These scandalous things next to someone. Be careful what you say in public, kid.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I've heard stories like that in like the subway of New York or something like that. I haven't been there, but I just heard that those just like happens. Like people speak languages and you just don't expect it, and then all of a sudden someone does.
Exactly.
So we spoke about how your intersection of skills relate to each other, but this also kind of brings into the whole theme of the show, polymathy. Something I ask all my guests is, what is a polymath to you?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. A polymath to me is somebody that takes life and is embracing it thoroughly, so thoroughly that they want to learn so many aspects about the world. They want to be able to do many different things themselves and synthesize these ideas in new ways and approach the world in such a way that like they don't want to just be a specialist. They don't want to just do one thing their whole life. They really want to take the world and mix these things and make new things out of them.
Yeah, remixing almost in a way too. Polymaths are the best remixers, I guess you could say.
Absolutely.
Well, and it's crazy because a good example is like Legos, where you break them down, you build them back up, and you just try to find new ways of building the same thing but in a different way, perhaps.
We have all of these different building blocks in the world. We have a whole periodic table of elements that we make things out of.
Yeah.
I mean, the more advanced our technology gets, the more we're going to get weird 3D printing things. Like we can 3D print organs nowadays and things.
And food and.
Yeah, like it's going to get more and more advanced as long as we don't destroy ourselves first.
Yeah, that's a whole other existential crisis right there.
I mean, that's a huge part of what I feel like my degree emphasized to me at times. Like, we need to not destroy ourselves either with, artificial weaponry, artificial intelligence weaponry, or, nuclear weaponry, or there's so many different ways that we could just destroy the world. It's very unfortunate.
But there are a lot of ways we can save the world and do many great things. And so I think having a positive outlook too helps. We do need a stoic kind of nihilist kind of thinking to help prevent situations. But I think it's also good to have this opportunistic and optimist outlook too.
I am an optimistic nihilist.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think I came across that term as well.
I literally look at all of these scary things and I go, okay, now how can I prevent that?
Yeah. For me, I'm curious to see what you will say for yours, but for me, it was about becoming a type 1 civilization on a Kardashev scale. And that's the Kardashev scale. And it was one of the things that, like, how can we get that happening? Well, there's certain things with smart cities and self-development that I think is most important and building into that. And that was why I chose my path. Is there a particular, very particular kind of goal or magnum opus you think will be for your life?
I'm definitely, since I actually got into this degree, I'm still kind of shocked that I did. I didn't even do the GRE or have any recommendations from professors because none of my professors were technical, so it's not like the recommendations would mean much to a technical degree.
Yeah.
So I just wrote a really, really good essay for it and fingers crossed to get in and did. So that since I actually got in, once I finished that, I'd actually like to pursue a PhD around AI safety and security. I'm really, really passionate about making the effects of AI long-term be both beneficial and equitable. Mm-hmm. Because it's about not just avoiding the negatives, it's also about making sure that the positives are spread equally across society. Because our capitalistic society is not set up for that.
Yeah.
AI could steal jobs in droves and droves, and people would just be out without any money. And the people who make the AI and own the AI, they may make a lot of money off of it, but that's still swaths of people that now you have that are unattached to things, and unattached people make trouble quite often in society over history. So you have to plan for these things. You have to set up things like basic income for when people are massively losing jobs to, technical things rather than or to automation rather. These are all very important aspects that make me super passionate about this path.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting too. How can we establish a more global understanding then when it comes to these problems that we're facing, do you think?
That's just so difficult because we addressed this some in the space security course that I was in, because the issue is that you have to get all of these multiple world leaders and groups to get along and agree on things.
Yeah. And
when you have a group in the US that tells somebody, no, we won't put that satellite in orbit, but then you have a group in India who doesn't have as many scruples and does it anyways. Mm-hmm. You're obviously not working together on a worldwide scale. There's reasons why these people said no to it going into space. They feel like it's just going to turn into more space junk. It's not safe. We have to be able to have more than what we do right now. We have loose agreements, I feel mostly, if I remember correctly. We don't have any strict actual treaties to do with space because it's been such a frontier that we've just had on the edge for so long. Space is just the most easy connection for these emerging technologies for what we can do to actually control them in the long run across countries. It's the same for things like autonomous weaponry. We have to all agree on these things because otherwise somebody is going to go ahead with it. And when one person does, everybody has to, because then the speed of battle becomes faster than human ability to perceive. It's really, really intense. I had to do an Oxford style debate on autonomous weaponry in one of my classes. And so I was on the against side, thankfully, but all of my team was against, but somebody had to be for. So we had to do a lot of research on devil's advocacy. Very interesting. Well,
yeah. And you mentioned satellites there, and you did like you mentioned earlier, you did your talk on satellite vulnerabilities. So could you explain that more for the audience too? Because that's a big area, like you said, especially space junk and all that.
Yeah, so my satellite vulnerability talk was inspired by my space security course that I had mentioned earlier. And on a whim, B-Sides Las Vegas does this really cool program called Proving Grounds. and it's for first-time speakers. So anyone who's never spoken a conference circuit before can get a mentor who helps them with like nerves and talking through and like dry runs and stuff, who's done this stuff before. And I got an amazing mentor for mine who does like mainframe hacking. He's one of the few mainframe hackers of the world. Amazing human. And he told me he didn't really have to help me too much other than listening to my dry runs, because I'm very good with presentations after having a business school and other things, which might have been a little bit more prepared for some of this, giving a presentation, than some of the other people he's worked with in the past. But it was just, it's probably the prettiest slides I've ever made too. So if anyone goes to watch it, like, it is literally, I took pictures from NASA's space and got to use them on all of the backgrounds. And,
that's cool. Yeah.
It's just, the slides are just gorgeous. So that's just a side of the point, though. I'm just proud of the artistic side of that part of it.
But you gotta have them both, though. Like, I hate slides that are just a white background. Like, you gotta have some artistic value in there.
Yes, and because it wasn't academic for once, I could be creative. So I was really looking forward to being a little more creative. It was more of a conference and not an academic presentation. But essentially I delved into the physical and technical vulnerabilities within satellites, because a lot of people just don't consider these things. They think about, oh, it's just satellite, whatever. They don't think about it. And when you get into it, like, they're very delicate things. Like, at orbit, something at speed, you could have like a dime and it can destroy a satellite. Like, weapons in space is such an interesting concept, because almost anything can be used as a weapon in space, with the right velocity like sent to it. Like, it was just such a fascinating concept to me overall whenever I delved into satellites in general. I'd had a group project that was like 15 people in a group, which I hope never happens again ever in my academic career. We had to coordinate 15 people giving a talk.
It just seems like it's way out of hand.
Yes, my section was on satellites, and so I took that and then turned it into a giant paper and a giant talk, because I thought it was really cool when I got into it. But I really hope I never have to deal with that many people in one presentation type thing again. That was very interesting. But I mean, if anyone wants to know anything about it or watches the video and has questions, just they can drop me an email. Or drop me a message on Twitter. I think you'll have those in the down
Twitter,
below.
Instagram, and then a couple of slides and whatnot. So it's all good.
Cool.
So speaking of, one more thing, kind of before we end up wrapping up, is your circus work and aerial arts, and how has all that impacted your life?
Oh man, it's been a wonderful and sometimes scary journey. I started doing circus. The very first time I ever touched anything circus would probably be Burning Man in 2014, when I picked up poi for the first time. And somebody let me play with their pair of poi that they had. It wasn't anything crazy, just some like LED
Tentables. Oh.
Yeah, pretty much LED poi on the end of strings, like nothing crazy. But then after that, I made a friend that week. After I was working on a project that week for Burning Man, an art project with somebody. I literally heard about the event like 2 weeks before, maybe a month before, and somebody backed out of an art project spot, and this guy was like, I need help with my art project. Will you come for free? It just pay gas to get here. And I was like, sure, I'll come help out with your art in the desert for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Why not?
Opportunistic, like I said.
That's where I first really encountered people in circus. And a friend that I made during that week that was camping with me, we more or less became like family throughout that week, because we also got left in the desert together at the end of it. I was abandoned in the desert by the person who drove me out there, along with 3 other people. Hitchhiked back into Reno, and somebody had gotten us a GoFundMe from Dallas as to get home. Like, they gave us like over $1,000 in like 2 hours to get home.
That's good. That's awesome. Yeah.
It was a bit of a journey, to say the least, that year. But this friend who I was mentioning, that we became family because of this, I helped him start his business that he had doing props for this stuff. So he made for a long time both practice and fire, poi, and stabs. So I was doing like his website some, and his photography some, and helping write like product bios, and pretty sure I'm actually still on his Etsy as a listed person, even though I'm not technically looking for him anymore.
Yeah.
And so he ended up giving me a pair at one point as payment for something. So he wasn't really paying me traditionally. It was just kind of like side work, helping a friend start his business. And so I started spinning it, and then I ended up buying a staff from him. And then when I went overseas, I couldn't take a bunch of it. I ended up Instead, I kind of spent Glasgow. I did fire spinning occasionally, because I met some fire spinners in Glasgow who spin in the park every single Friday night, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Literally the first Friday in town, I wandered through the park at night with my partner, and I was like, I see fire, I see light, those are my people.
Right.
So literally the first weekend in town, I met all of the circus people that do fire.
That's cool.
And spent every time I go back to Glasgow, I meet up with them now, and I'll borrow their tools and like spin fire in the park with them. After that, when I went to Dublin, I decided to actually pick up real aerials, not just like, I couldn't find a good spinning group there, so I was like, I'm just going to try actual aerials. And it took me 2 gyms to find one that I liked. I went a couple at one place and then to another. And then it's just been a journey from there. I've now trained circus in 5 different countries.
That's crazy. And it's interesting. I actually, way young, I was spinning poly with some people in town. It's crazy how they kind of you just come across it in a way. And then once you actually dig into it too, it's really interesting as well.
I was just saying it's a whole art form.
Yeah, it is. What's the most fascinating thing, do you think, to those kind of arts?
I like that it's kinetic math.
Understanding
I really do.
Momentum is.
Super technical about how they do their like circus art stuff, and it's literally kinetic math. And I also met a woman when I was doing flying trapeze in Glasgow. She was doing her PhD, I believe, on circus physics. How cool is circus physics as a PhD?
Well, it's funny because like
flying through the air.
Yeah, one of my clients I was talking to, he wanted to play basketball when I was training him because it's a fitness client, and literally when I was talking to him about it, because he's younger, I was explaining basketball with the lens of physics. Like, you have to get this amount of trajectory to get to that point, and you have to see the arch of it. And it's funny just how much like you use that in so many different ways. Balance and walking. As a lifeguard, I had to use it to walk on those slippery walls without having to understand the momentum and balance in order to not fall off.
Yeah, absolutely. With flying trapeze, it's funny because we joke like a lazy person sport, because if you do it right, you're using your momentum, not actually your strength. Yeah. Because that's kind of like the swinging and flying trapeze is you're using momentum. I never expected I would go do that. I don't know. I think what it took for me with circus was I've never been a sporty person. I've always been very much the nerdy girl who's maybe a little bit softer. And I finally was like, I need to find a sport that will also interest me and is artistic. And this was my artistic, non-competitive sport, because people are super supportive in circus, and like, of course there are competitions, but for them overall, it's very like a very supportive community. If you want to learn something, a lot of times people will teach you.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because I was never much of a sporty person, so I empathize with that, because growing up, being able to be physical sucked, and like I just had no strength for it. And once you find something you do resonate with, it does actually it's a good entry point. You can always expand from there too, but I think if you're happy, that's what matters.
Yeah, I'm sad I haven't gotten to do it much in the last year because of COVID. I don't have my own equipment. I typically would have to go to a gym to get like silks and like the aerial hoop and other things that I do. But I'm hoping that someday in the long run, I'll be able to have like a setup that I can do on my own, like outside, like a whole like big A-frame thing to be able to practice on my own. One of these days I will. It was definitely eye-opening when I was live painting at a Spangle show here in Kansas City. And a woman that I was in my classes with for aerials not last fall, but 2019 fall, I was live painting at the show, and she was doing Lyra on stage, and I was like, I'm in class with that girl.
That's crazy.
I was like, maybe I am good enough to actually perform nowadays.
Yeah, I think oftentimes people often underestimate their abilities too. Especially polymaths too. People like us who are doing multidisciplinary things, we would think that our skills aren't deep enough because we've only pursued it a little bit, but sometimes we pursue it enough with enough passion that we might know more than most people.
Yeah, I've noticed that actually, and like it's really interesting because like sometimes I'll get that imposter feeling of like,
Imposter syndrome.
No, you just don't know enough of that, and then I hear the echo of all of my friends behind me going, "Yes, you do." Right before this, I actually posted on Facebook to my friends being like, I'm really nervous about this interview thing I'm doing, and I got a resounding response from all of my people who are close to me being like, "You're awesome, shush."
Yeah, you'll be fine. You've been fine this whole time. I don't think you even said or which is a lot of people make mistakes with. And honestly, too, you were super patient when we had internet issues as well, so you're good.
I'm used to internet issues. I mean, you have to consider if I have bad internet, it's something that I've dealt with, like, for interviews and other things this year, so.
I understand. I'm surprised that if you have fiber, you would have issues with that.
It's automatically capped. So Google caps it because it's free.
Can you pay for it?
I could.
It could? Okay. I didn't know if there's an option. I honestly don't know enough about Google Fiber. Like, I want Google Fiber. I almost thought about moving to KC just so I could get it.
They don't offer this anymore, which is why we kind of got by, because it was already established in our apartment complex we're in. So they actually don't offer Google Fiber anymore for the free version. So when we saw free internet, we were like, well, we might as well and save like hundreds of dollars over the year.
Yeah, definitely. That's just super cool though. And I'm just saying, like, you did well on the show. And where could people find you online if they want to continue this journey with you?
I'm most easily probably found on Twitter or Instagram at ArisenRoses, and that's ArisenRoses. And you can also find me at ArisenRoses@gmail.com if you'd like to email me. Some people just don't prefer to be on social media, so
makes
I respect. Elsewise, maybe at a conference someday if you're into information security.
Make sure you bump in there. Yeah. And then what could be like a call to action or call to growth for the audience to do?
Ooh, that's an interesting one. So I'd say my call to action is to be kind to each other in these really difficult times we're all in. You don't know what other people are struggling with out there. And aside from the fact that COVID is hitting all of us, there's other things that go on in people's lives on top of that. And we're all going through a collective trauma right now. So be kind. If you can do nothing else, be kind to both yourself and others.
Yeah, I like that. And it's very simple that you can remember each day. Like, what I'm doing right now kind?
Both to myself and other people.
Exactly.
Because being kind to yourself is very important too.
A lot of people do forget about that. It's a lot of times people give each other too much crap for yourself. They're like, hey, I'm not good enough, or I'm not good enough for this particular thing. It's like, sure you are. Just keep working at it, and you can keep being, like I said, kind to yourself.
We all start out mediocre. We are all born completely blank.
The beginner's mind. So once again, this is Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator, and Elizabeth Wilson on the Polymath podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.